You have checked it again, haven't you? The message you sent, wondering if it landed right. The photo you posted, refreshing to see who noticed. The comment in the meeting, replayed in your head, wondering if they thought you sounded smart or foolish. Or somewhere in between, here is the strange, uncomfortable truth psychology has uncovered. Your sense of self is not actually generated from within you. It is borrowed moment by moment from the eyes of everyone around you. You didn't choose this. No one does. It was built into you before you could walk, long before you had the words to question it. And it is quietly running your life right now, shaping who you call, what you post, what you say, and what you swallow instead of saying. If you've ever felt an aching need for someone, anyone, to simply say, "You did well," stay with me. Because what looks like insecurity is actually one of the oldest, most misunderstood survival mechanisms the human mind has ever built. Somewhere along the way, most of us learned an unspoken lesson. Our worth is not a fixed internal fact. It's a verdict, delivered daily by the people around us. Think about the version of you that exists in a room full of strangers versus the version of you that exists completely alone. Notice how different those two people can feel. The version around others is polished, careful, scanning faces for signs of approval or disappointment. The version alone is quieter, sometimes calmer, sometimes lonelier, but rarely as anxious as the one performing for an audience. This isn't vanity. It isn't weakness. It's your nervous system, running an ancient program that once meant the difference between survival and abandonment. And it hasn't yet realized that the tribe you're seeking approval from today is a Slack channel, a comment section, or a dinner table, not a life or death circle around a fire. Let's look at what's actually happening beneath this craving. Psychologist Mark Leary developed what he called sociometer theory in the mid-1990s. His research proposed something quietly profound. Self-esteem isn't really about how you feel about yourself in isolation. It functions as an internal gauge, a sociometer, constantly measuring how accepted, valued, or at risk of rejection you are within your social world. When Leary and his colleagues studied this, they found that self-esteem rises and falls in direct response to cues of social inclusion or exclusion, not because we're shallow, but because for most of human history, being cast out of the group meant literal death. Your self-esteem isn't vanity. It's a smoke detector for social danger, evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, still going off today over a text left on read. Now bring in research by psychologists Jennifer Crocker and Connie Wolf, who studied what they called contingencies of self-worth, the specific domains people depend on to feel valuable. Their research found that for many people, approval from others becomes one of the primary pillars propping up their entire sense of self. And here's the critical finding. When self-worth is contingent on a domain like approval, even small doses of disapproval, a lukewarm response, a missed compliment, can produce outsized emotional consequences because so much identity has been staked on that single, fragile source. Put simply, if your self-worth was built on the foundation of being approved of, then every silence, every unanswered message, every neutral expression on someone's face doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels like the ground quietly shifting beneath your entire sense of who you are. Picture a young employee named Daniel, who delivers a strong presentation at work. His manager says nothing, not because it was bad, but because she's simply busy. Daniel spends the entire evening replaying the meeting, convinced he must have failed, even though nothing was ever actually said. Picture two friends. One posts about a personal achievement and watches, refreshing the app every few minutes, gauging her own accomplishment not by how she feels about it, but by how many people acknowledge it. The joy of the achievement gets quietly outsourced to a notification count. Picture a family dinner, where a mother constantly seeks her adult children's approval of her cooking, her opinions, her choices, a habit her own children slowly realize she has carried since childhood, when praise from her own parents was rare, and criticism came easily. Picture a romantic relationship where one partner constantly asks, "Are you sure you're not upset with me?" Not because there's any real evidence of conflict, but because the smallest ambiguity in a partner's tone triggers a full internal alarm system built long before this relationship even began. Picture a child, praised only for grades, trophies, and achievements, never simply for being present, curious, or kind. That child grows into an adult who cannot rest in ordinary moments, because ordinary moments never earned approval, and unearned approval to them doesn't quite feel real. Every one of these people is doing the same quiet math, calculating their own worth using other people's reactions as the only currency they've ever been taught to trust. The hidden sign 1. The silent scorekeeping constantly, almost unconsciously, tracking how others respond to you, tone of voice, response time, facial expressions, and adjusting your self-perception accordingly. This is sociometer theory in real time. Your nervous system treats small social cues as data about your safety and belonging, whether or not the stakes are actually that high. Leary's research found that self-esteem fluctuates in direct correlation with perceived social inclusion or exclusion, even over minor ambiguous interactions. Danielle, replaying a meeting all evening over his manager's simple silence. A person's sense of worth becomes a moving target, rising and falling dozens of times a day based on cues most people around them never even intended to send. Sign 2. Outsourcing joy to reaction feeling. Genuine accomplishment or happiness only once it has been acknowledged by others, likes, comments, praise, rather than in the moment itself. When approval becomes a core contingency of self-worth, internal experience alone stops feeling sufficient. Validation becomes the missing ingredient that makes an achievement feel real. Crocker and Wolf's research on contingencies of self-worth found that people who base self-esteem heavily on external approval show larger emotional swings tied to social feedback, compared to those whose self-worth rests on more internally stable domains. The friend refreshing her phone after posting an achievement, her sense of pride quietly waiting for permission from a notification count. Joy becomes conditional, borrowed, and fragile, always one silent post away from feeling meaningless. Sign 3. Approval. Seeking as inherited behavior, constantly seeking reassurance or validation from family members, even well into adulthood. Patterns of approval seeking are often inherited. A parent who grew up needing constant validation frequently, unintentionally, models that same anxious pattern to their children. Contingencies of self-worth research suggests that approval dependence, once established early in life, tends to remain a stable trait across the lifespan unless consciously addressed. The mother seeking her grown children's approval of her cooking and choices, a pattern she absorbed from her own upbringing, now quietly passed forward. Entire family systems can revolve around an invisible, generational hunger for approval that nobody named out loud, but everyone somehow learned to perform. Sign 4. Reading danger into ambiguity, interpreting neutral or ambiguous behavior. A short reply, a flat tone, as a sign of disapproval or anger. A highly sensitive sociometer treats ambiguous social signals as potential threats, defaulting to worst-case interpretations because evolutionarily, it was safer to overreact to a possible rejection than to miss a real one. Leary's sociometer research found self-esteem is especially reactive within the ambiguous, neutral to mildly negative, range of feedback, precisely because that's where the most important information about acceptance or exclusion tends to hide. The partner repeatedly asking, "Are you upset with me?" over nothing more than a quiet tone of voice. Relationships built on genuine safety can still feel constantly at risk, simply because the internal alarm system was calibrated for a much harsher environment. Sign 5. Achievement without rest, feeling unable to relax, celebrate, or simply exist without producing something worthy of praise. When approval was historically earned only through performance, grades, achievements, obedience, ordinary, unearned moments of existing can feel unsafe or unjustified. Crocker and Wolf's studies on academically contingent self-worth found that individuals whose self-esteem depends heavily on achievement experience heightened stress specifically around neutral or unproductive periods, not just failure itself. The adult raised on conditional praise, who cannot enjoy a quiet Sunday afternoon without a nagging sense that they should be doing something to earn their right to rest. Life becomes an endless performance with no intermission. Approval keeps the curtain open, but it never lets the person go home. Notice what runs beneath every single one of these signs. None of it is vanity. None of it is weakness. It is an ancient survival system, built for a world of small tribes where exclusion meant death, still running its old code inside a modern world of comment sections, performance reviews, and dinner table silences. If you feel a quiet ache reading this, remembering a compliment you needed but never received, or a moment you couldn't simply enjoy without someone else's reaction confirming it was allowed, that ache is not shallow, it's human. It's the sound of an old alarm system, still faithfully doing its job long after the danger it was built for has changed shape entirely. Here is what almost no one tells you. Craving approval is not proof that you are insecure, needy, or broken. It is proof that you are a social creature, built by evolution to survive within groups, and that your particular sociometer simply learned, somewhere along the way, to run a little hotter than it needs to. This isn't a flaw to be ashamed of. It's a setting that can be recalibrated. Psychology doesn't ask you to stop caring what others think. That would be neither possible nor healthy. It asks you to stop letting that single gauge be the only instrument reading your worth. The goal isn't indifference to others' opinions. The goal is an internal foundation sturdy enough that approval becomes a bonus, not oxygen. Practical solutions. Diversify your contingencies of self-worth. Since Crocker and Wolf's research shows self-esteem is more stable when it isn't staked entirely on one domain, deliberately build sources of self-worth that don't depend on others' reactions. A skill practiced privately, a value lived quietly, a personal standard met without an audience. Practice the unwitnessed win. Do one small, meaningful thing each week that no one else will ever know about, and notice, on purpose, how it feels to value it yourself, without needing it observed or praised. Interrupt the ambiguity spiral. The next time you interpret a flat tone or short reply as rejection, pause and generate 2 alternative explanations before assuming the worst. This directly counters the sociometer's evolutionary bias toward worst-case interpretation. Separate the achievement from the applause. After completing something meaningful, pause before checking anyone's reaction. Sit with your own assessment of the work for at least a few minutes. First, training the nervous system to register accomplishment. Internally, before it looks outward for confirmation. Notice inherited patterns without judgment. If you recognize approval-seeking patterns that trace back to a parent or caregiver, name it gently. This isn't only mine. I learned this. Naming the inheritance loosens its grip, turning an invisible compulsion into a conscious, changeable choice. Maybe you were never actually desperate for attention. Maybe you were simply a person whose earliest sense of safety depended on being seen a certain way, and some part of you, quietly, has been trying to recreate that safety in every room you've ever walked into since. But here is the truth. Psychology keeps circling back to. You were never meant to be your own audience's approval alone. You were meant to also be your own witness. Imagine your worth not as a light that only turns on when someone else flips the switch, but as a candle you've been carrying all along, one that was simply taught, very early, to wait for permission before it was allowed to glow. It doesn't need that permission. It never did. It only needs you to finally notice it was burning the whole time. If this video described a version of you that quietly waits for someone else's reaction before believing something is real, you're not alone in this. Comment the word "seen" if this felt true for you today. If this gave you language for something you've always felt but never understood, share it with someone still waiting for approval they may never fully need. And if you want more psychology that helps you understand the quiet systems running your emotions, subscribe. The next video might help you finally trust the light you've been carrying all along. You don't need permission to matter. You already do.